To find out more about tariffs, Trump, and the economy, we traveled to Chapman University in Orange County, California to meet with a leading expert. Professor Pete Weitzner is an OC legend. Professor Pete is a 35-year journalist who specializes in reporting on the business and financial markets. Pete was a host of the very popular Chapman Business Report, airing for years on PBS. He was just the fourth editor in the 50-year history of the iconic Orange County Business Journal, a financial industry go-to paper. And he is a broadcast journalism professor here at Chapman. Professor Pete, thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure, Dave. We're longtime colleagues, longtime friends. Great to see you again.
Likewise. Let's begin with tariffs. Obviously, and let me set the stage just for 60 seconds. If you listen to the liberal media, which is much of the media, Trump is a devil, tariffs are horrible, the economy is a disaster,
right,
etc. If you listen to many on the far-right media, it's great. Obviously, it's somewhere in the middle, so to speak. There's good points about the tariffs, the leverage and whatnot, and it could also be a problem. Certainly, the economy is okay these days. As a CPA, a former CPA, as a financial journalist, you've done so much in this industry. What is your take with the tariffs?
Well, here's one of the interesting things about tariffs. You talked about politically, the far conservative right, like Grover Norquist, the Club for Growth. Well, tariffs, which are taxes, they're an anathema to them. On the Democrat side, our longtime colleague, Peter Navarro, I believe is still one of President Trump's chief economic advisors. Peter was very left ideologically. It was tariffs and unfair trade, especially with China, that got Peter, and I suspect many working class Democrat-minded folks, to go with President Trump. My view is the jury is out, but consider this. Tariffs do two things. So we're now 8-9 months in. We record this a little bit before you'll run it. And Trump trade policy seems to change weekly, depending on how. So tariffs do two things. They raise revenue, right? And as we sit here in 2025, that has far exceeded expectations. We're at something like a pace for $300 billion in tariffs.
Right.
Last year it was $70 billion. That's a big enough number to put toward the annual deficit, or has been portrayed in a populist manner to maybe do a rebate or refund to all taxpayers. But the bigger thing they do is, we would love to pull all tariffs or make them all low as long as it's reciprocal. So they're leveraged. So now not only will companies trade, or countries trade more fairly with us, but our companies will, instead of importing raw materials, Apple, NVIDIA, drug companies like Johnson & Johnson, they'll build plants here. That's the bigger goal. So yes, $300 billion is nice to collect. It's probably not sustainable for year after year, but the bigger goal is to use it as leverage to get more equitable trade, drive down our trade deficit. We're all done journalism. Only time will tell us like the worst thing you could do. But at this point, especially since two things, his trade policy does seem to change, it's very fluid, and the courts have also been intervening on the trade policy, sometimes with injunctions.
Although give him credit for this, and again, you cannot agree and disagree with him on everything. There's some good, there's some bad, certainly. However, with that said, there's got to be a more level playing field. I mean, the trade deficit is insane. I'm not sure what's wrong with saying America first in terms of bringing manufacturing back here. In Europe, you don't see Fords and Dodge and Chevrolet and Jeep driving on the road. You see the European cars. You see Japanese cars. You see Chinese imports. You go to the port of, let's say, Long Beach, the port of LA. They've got 5 billion crates and cases of Hanjin shipping and Korean shipping and China Air and this and that. I believe that there's not that much cargo at ports overseas. So there is something to be said about trying to just say, look, this has got to be somewhat of a more level playing field.
No doubt. The Europeans have been famously protectionist. Some of this goes back even to the 50s, kind of the Marshall Plan idea. We needed to rebuild those countries, rebuild their economies post-war. And then the developing countries now are some of the biggest culprits. That's typical developing nations. They are big-time exporters. That would be Brazil, India. If you look at some of the biggest tariffs that are in place as we speak, they're against those countries. Just on paper, if you say crossed out the names of the countries and said these have tariffs or they're X and put the US on the other side, it's a massive imbalance. It's reflected in our trade deficit, which has other problems, inflation, job market.
And what I've always appreciated, Professor Pete, is knowing you so many years and such a great business journalist you are. You and I both, we take such sort of a centrist approach to it. We don't go liberal, we don't go conservative, far left, far right. We look at things as common sense. For me, the jury is out on tariffs. I don't know exactly, which is why I have you here to provide some fodder. And I appreciate the fact it's always nonpartisan with you, which is what I try to accomplish here on the program, a nonpartisan, common sense solution. However, from what we have seen and witnessed so far, fair to say probably, Pete, that at the very least, tariffs have given Trump leverage to make some of these great trade deals that no one in the media really wants to report about.
And we've had some, it's just framework deals with the entire European Union, even with China. They're framework and promises of companies like Apple was like $100 billion. I mentioned NVIDIA, which may be the most valuable company in the world with their dominance in the AI place, promising to invest, Merck, Johnson & Johnson. So let's look at the scorecard 9 months into Trump 2. So stock market's up about 7% on the S&P. That's pretty good. Just had 3% growth. That's pretty good, bouncing off a little bit of a low level. But the trade deficit is growing. Job growth isn't all that terrific. I think a lowering of interest rates, but then there's concerns about inflation. That took a little jump, but it's still about 3%. That's not that bad. So the scorecard with the tariff impact isn't bad so far. It was expected to be much more inflationary, and still a lot of economists say down the road. If you look at the scorecard of the Trump 1 up to COVID, I think one would have to be terribly unfair to say that that wasn't about as strong an American economy measured anyway. Importantly, in housing starts, I should mention, are down as well. That's important. But housing was booming, stock market booming, job growth was terrific, big rise in the middle class, standard of living for all Americans. And then you look, of course, at his career in private industry. If I'm a betting person, I'm gonna look at the track record, take out the name on top because it makes half the country blank. If I'm a betting person, I'm certainly giving him leeway to see how it plays out. Again, I don't like it so much when he talks, look at this beautiful revenue coming in from tariffs. That's secondary. It's to drive, as you mentioned, these countries, the European nations, the developing countries with growing economies, to trade more equitably with us.
Orange County, California legend, Professor Pete Weitzner. Thank you so much for being here.